Hi, and welcome to Minar, the Society of Props Managers webinar series for the live theater prop professionals. My name is Tammy Honesty. I am a SPM member and the Associate Professor of Scenic Design, Paints, and Props at West Virginia University. SPM, short for Society of Prop Managers, got its start back in 1994 when a small but mighty group of props folks in the Midwest came together to tackle shared challenges and make sure props had a seat at the table alongside other production departments. Fast forward to today, and we're a thriving group of over 150 professional prop managers and educators from theaters, operas, companies, schools, and connected all throughout an international network. We share resources, swap tips, troubleshoot problems, and support each other with everything from safety info to continuing education. Like our past Spaminars, tonight's session is a pay what you can. Any donations go directly to supporting these programs and our annual grants for early career prop professionals. If you're able to chip in, we'll drop the link in the live chat. Every little bit helps, and we're super grateful for the support. Just a heads up, the live transcription is on for today's webinar, so you can follow along in real time. We're also recording our talk, and we'll share it later on our YouTube channel. As we go along, feel free to drop your questions in the chat. We'll save some time at the end to go through all of the questions. Now, it's time for the good part. Today, we'll be talking with an incredible panel of cultural and accessibility consultants about how we can bring greater authenticity and care to the props we put on stage. Joining us tonight is Paul Behrhorst, Jenna Bainbridge, Reha Benz, and Liam Gable, and our host, Kristen Ward.
Hi, thank you, Tammy. My name is Kristen Ward. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm a props assistant at Carnegie Mellon University. And I'm really excited to be talking with you all today. Just a short overview before I open it up for our panelists to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit more about themselves. Paul Behrhorst and Jenna Bainbridge are co-founders of ConsultAbility. Paul is also the Associate Director of Accessibility at PAC NYC. He's a neurodiverse accessibility leader with 18 plus years working in theater and live events. And Jenna Bainbridge is the current and first disabled Nessa Rose on Broadway. Our second panelist, Raja Benz, is an intimacy professional, theater maker, and cultural consultant based in Philadelphia. Raja has worked professionally across a number of different projects, notably Swagger from AppleTV, and major theater institutions, including the Tectonic Theatre Project, Studio Theater, Virginia Rep, and numerous universities, including Penn State, University of South Carolina Upstate, and University of Richmond. Finally, but not least, Liam Gable is a trans director, performance maker, and community organizer who creates containers for collective remembering and radical celebration. Liam teaches acting and directing at Lehigh University. Also a Drama League resident in 2021, Drama League Fellow 2007, BFA from Virginia Commonwealth University, and a MFA from Carnegie Mellon University. Welcome, everybody. Let's start with Paul and Jenna. If you want to tell us a little bit more about yourselves, as well as ConsultAbility.
Great. Thank you for having us, everybody. As has been said, I'm Paul Behrhorst, he, him, one of the co-founders of ConsultAbility and the executive director. And this is my wife, Jenna. We are married. We started ConsultAbility a little over 3 years ago. We realized that there was a lot of requests for information on how to cast disabled artists, work with disabled artists, and what we were realizing was that disabled artists were having to then do those projects, and they would have to advocate for themselves. So we decided to, get rid of that barrier as best we can and give folks consultants that can help them through that process without them having to rely on the artists they're already working with and creating a second job for them.
Yeah, we have both been doing this work for over 20 years individually. ConsultAbility is new, but the work is not. I, as a disabled actor, was feeling it firsthand how much I was being asked to also be a consultant and also be a dramaturg and also, have to answer every single question about disability and how to accommodate for me as well as any other disabled people in the room. And Paul was working backstage primarily, but also having the same conversations. So together, we decided that it would make a lot of sense to form one single company that people could come to answer those questions and also to do space audits, as well as we do cultural audits. So we really look at an institution and say, what are you doing for accessibility and what can you be doing to improve accessibility?
That's great. Thank you. Raja.
Hey y'all, I'm Raja. She and her pronouns. I'm living in Chicago, working at the University of Michigan currently, where I am heading the design of the consent-based practices program for performance across our um, four areas, so theater, musical theater, opera, and dance. My work is primarily as an intimacy professional. I am one of the OGs, I like to say, in the sense that I started working as an intimacy professional in 2016 in the Chicago DIY market, where we were kind of making everything out of the cardboard we could steal from the dumpsters. Um, and this has taken me through just a series of paths. I was also coming out as a trans woman at the time. And as I'm sure all of my colleagues will say, a lot of what was happening was becoming a consultant without necessarily the consent of my labor, and being really interested in how we could navigate that. So I kind of got a reputation for delivering, two invoices when that started happening. Um, yeah, my work now takes me where I'm working on consent-based practices. I see issues of cultural representation as being fundamentally not different than issues of consent and autonomy in performance. And so broadly, I'm really interested in sort of not just authentic performances of culture, but empowering performances of that, and sort of investigating, as I'm sure all of us will talk about today, the multiple sites of that this work can take place. So that's what I'm doing nowadays. Working my days teaching the kids about consent and culture. It's a really lucky life I get to live, so I'm so glad to be here with y'all.
And much needed now.
It's really lucky.
Sure.
I really do feel so lucky.
Liam, tell us a little bit about yourself, what you do.
Hello, my name's Liam Gable. I use they, he pronouns. I'm a trans director, and I feel like many other people on this call. I come to this work through uh, being hired as the first trans artist at institutions and then saying, great, well, that comes with another job, actually. And I can also do that job for you. And so that's actually how I got into cultural consulting. It's really exciting to be on this call with Kristen, who has the Carnegie Mellon connection, and with Raja, who I've worked with before on my play Daddy about trans mask pregnancy. Yeah, so I do a lot of things in theater. I write plays, I direct plays. But I've increasingly started to work in the world of intimacy direction and in the world of cultural consulting, specifically working around trans stories. A lot of times as the first trans voice in the room, but often actually not as the only trans voice in the room, as one of a collective of trans voices who can be the kind of go-to person for people to come to when they have questions. Yeah, and I'm super happy to be here.
Thank you. So our first question for our panelists is, what is your primary job as a cultural or access and intimacy consultant?
So I think my like cheeky answer is like the primary job is helping us figure out what the primary job is. Because I'm sure you probably noticed that probably all of us took a little pause there and was like, you're right, the contours of this job can be
Yeah, it's
in some instances quite unclear. And so I think, at least, uh, although lightly a joke, but also very true, a lot of my job lately has been figuring out what my job actually can be. Working within institutions, navigating the sort of ways that culture is not something you can just read on a piece of paper and understand exactly what's happening in a given space and actually be effective. So although we joke about how these jobs are sometimes unclear, finding clarity about where this job actually would intersect any given institution, school, place is kind of the first thing I have to assess before I could really answer what is that going
Mhm.
to contain for this relationship for me, for me.
All right. Uh, yeah. So for the work that I do, I think that my job is to go into a space and to assess the access and then also the inclusivity of that space for disabled artists. We usually do that through either through audits or through working directly on a show that usually is about the disabled experience and helping them navigate how to hire disabled artists, how to then support those artists through the entire process, through through rehearsals, through tech, through shows, and also through doing we do a lot of workshops and a lot of education as well.
Yeah, we start with what are the physical barriers preventing artists with disabilities from succeeding in your space, whether that's a designer, a technician, an actor, or even an audience member. What physical barriers are preventing people with disabilities from accessing your space? And once you've removed those, are there cultural barriers that are still preventing access? And we try to do it as a twofold approach. In addition to that, as an actor with a disability, I bring that into every single show I work on. My goal is always to leave a theater more accessible than how I found it. And it's amazing how many theaters are still very reluctant to embrace accessibility.
Yeah, I feel like really similar to Raja. My answer is sort of, it depends on what the needs are of the space. I feel like one of the primary things, though, that I end up serving as is a point person for people who think that their questions might be too stupid or scary to ask, or might just have things that they're unsure about and they're not sure how to navigate either uh, representing transness in some way or a relationship with a trans colleague. And they want to be sure to do things in the way that is the most conscientious. And so I'm there to be that person who is available to field those sorts of questions for people um, in as generous a way as possible. I also sometimes front load with like a workshop or something else. And similar actually to Paul and Jenna, I'm often doing sort of like space audits. So I'm often the person being like, oh, I arrived on site and actually the only gender neutral bathroom is like multiple floors away from where we're rehearsing. And that really creates issues with breaks. So either we need to take longer breaks or we need to figure out how to get a bathroom closer. So it's often kind of those like really, or like things like dressing rooms, like those really kind of systemic infrastructure, physical things that are extremely slow moving. I'm often the person helping to brainstorm the stop gaps for the artists that are like in the situation now.
I was going to say, just something I would reflect back that I think all of us are touching on is that like infrastructure has qualities to it, and there are ways in which the infrastructure reflects our sort of commitment, right? So a lot of people don't think about what it would mean to be on tour with somebody who uses injectable medication and need to have like safe needle disposal sites. Um, the infrastructure tells us about the values that you prioritize in many ways, and a lot of the times the answer is, oh, well, we can't change the infrastructure. And I don't know, just it feels very trans to me to say there is no structure you can tell me is too permanent to change when my body is the site of this reclamation and this rebuilding day and day. So if you want to be truly trans with it with me, then let's not look at infrastructure as this thing that doesn't move. There are qualities and choices that are made within that.
What are some reasons a theater company might hire you? Or some specific instances where you were brought in for a certain reason.
The one that we get the most is a theater company has either chosen a piece that features disabled voices or is hiring somebody with a disability and they're having kind of an oh shit moment of like we need to make sure that we're ready. That's the thing that we see the most often. The other thing that we get a lot actually is students reaching out to us. It's students coming to us and saying our educational institution isn't accessible, and they've tried to go through faculty or through, higher levels at their educational institutions and aren't getting the access that they need. And so they've gone to a third party of us to say, can you come in and talk to our faculty? And we actually have that quite frequently.
Yeah, that's definitely the only place we see kind of proactive desire for this type of work, as opposed to a reactive desire.
Yeah, I would say the same, right? Especially coming from the intimacy world, the unfortunate truth is that we were often called in response to a critical incident or somehow the institution highlighting a need or a learning gap. And so while it's not my favorite way that we come into work, it is a truth of what happens a lot. That being said, um, there are often opportunities for this work to integrate regardless, right? So like every once in a while you'll get that theater who's thinking about like we have to build the place for the diversity we're seeking to come to for us to be able to do that. So that's often like a community engagement manager or something like that who's got that foresight. I really do love when work comes in like that, but the truth is a lot of it is situational in the current state of where we are for me.
Yeah, totally. I'm most often called when either myself or someone else is the first trans artist that an organization is hiring. And then the other reason that I've been called in is because there's nobody in the leadership in the room who holds the identity of some of the performers in the room and or some of the designers in the room or the topic. So that, for example, there's a show that's being done that has trans content, but there is nobody in the director or playwright chair who holds that identity. And I'm called in to be the person who is um, not always like on that level or not necessarily on that level, but who can be a part of that leadership team, at least outside of the performers and the other contract artists who can be somebody to talk to.
What do you see as the differences between a consultant and a dramaturg? And have you ever been hired as one thing, but it turned out to be more the other?
I think in a perfect world, like dramaturgs get to think about story as their like primary mode of operation. And so they're really uh, looking at cultural specificity as one of the lenses through which they're seeing story, but they're able to kind of spread their work out and look at things structurally and be like another outside eye. And cultural consultants are there for a specific reason, and that is to help to inform members of the team about best practices around uh, creating spaces for folks with identities to see themselves and folks with certain identities to be a part of the team in the way that is like most safe and affirming to us. And so it's a little bit like we're more container holders than dramaturgs who are more like artistically looking at how the thing moves through, which again, like cultural specificity is a part of that. But they're not, dramaturgs shouldn't be the ones who are meant to be advocating for structural change or for kind of systems and processes and procedures for people on the team. That's more what we do as cultural consultants. Um, I have been brought on as an associate director when I was meant to be a cultural consultant because I don't dramaturg as a part of my practice. I haven't been brought on as a dramaturg, but yeah, I think all of us have experiences of being hired for our artistry, and then being called upon to do to inform people about how to best accommodate us and the people kind of who we're working with who might share our identities. I think that that's a part of being a marginalized artist.
Yeah, I refer to it as sort of content informed, right? Is it the content of the given production, its artistic representations, or are we looking at the forms and structures of how we sort of render this performance? Um, in the intimacy world, those divides are perhaps a little less clear, I will say, because we do choreographic and storytelling. And so I like to say when my job is going best, I'm actually working more similar to a dramaturg and choreographer than like an HR consultant. That's usually the sign that at least for an intimacy professional that we're perhaps actually doing the work what needs to be a consultant, right? So in the intimacy world, we've been getting really specific about terms like intimacy choreographer versus consultant versus coordinator for these exact reasons to help render those lines clearer. Are you asking for institutional structure and support? Are you looking for a storyteller to help you tell nuanced stories of intimacy? Um, and getting to the core of sort of that is what helps me figure out how I might collaborate with a given dramaturg. Um, I like to aspire to be more like them when my job is going well, is how I like to put it.
Can you tell us about a show that you've worked on where you felt that your work was specifically important?
We've worked on some pretty wonderful shows. One that we did from beginning to end was called All of Me, and it was at the new group here at they performed at Signature Theater here in New York, and we got to be there from the very beginning, working with the theater company on how to make the experience completely accessible from casting all the way until closing. So the entire story was about disability. It featured disabled actors, they had disabled technicians, they had a disabled assistant director, and so we were able to help coordinate all of that. And the best compliment I got that entire experience was at the closing party, or at the opening party. One of the actors said to me that it was the first time that they never worried about accessibility the entire process. They said, like, I knew we were fine. Any room I came into, I knew we were going to be fine.
And what's interesting, the two actors in the show in particular who had worked on the show previously and had issues in multiple areas never had to call us. And I also took that as like we did the work up front and made the space work for them, and made the team, ready to work with them from the beginning, and in a way that they didn't need to reach out to us for other issues coming up. So that was also that made that feel pretty great. Yeah, I mean, I can talk about, since we're here for props too, that there have been some pretty awesome shows that we have had a chance to work on, some together, where, creating props around disability in a way that really highlights disability and makes that something that is like integrated into the show. And I mean, even back to Beauty and the Beast, which was one of the first shows that we worked on together, and create with a theater company that exclusively cast actors with disabilities. So create, having those costumes and those prop pieces actually represent the disabilities of the people that were using them was something that has always stuck with me.
So, for example, they built Mrs. Potts and Chip were built around power chair users' chairs, so that they like went on top of them, and they were able to make these incredible three-dimensional teapots And they moved in such a beautiful way because they incorporated the movement of the power chair into the design of this costume slash prop piece. I've also, when I did a show called Sups last year, we really wanted a confetti cannon in a scene. It was like everyone was trying to figure out how do we hide this confetti cannon somewhere on stage. And I was like, well, I've got a cup holder just on my wheelchair. Like it exists on my wheelchair. And it was like this breakthrough moment where it was like, oh my God, we can hide everything in this cup holder. And it became an exciting part of the scene of like, how do we get it out of the cup holder and how do we pass it to the people who are going to throw these confetti cannons? It became a huge asset to the storytelling because we were willing to think creatively about how do we incorporate these props and make them really, they were completely accessible and we wouldn't have been able to have them had my wheelchair not been there.
What are some other examples for Liam and Raja where where your consultant background overlaps with the world of props?
I'm thinking of Brandon Jacob Jenkins' Gloria at the University of Michigan. For those who don't know, this is a play that depicts quite graphically a workplace violence in the form of an active shooter. Um, and the consulting really became clear that sometimes when we think of cultural consulting, we think we mean representations of a given specific culture and not the cultures of performance and being together, the cultures of how we aim to be with each other through a given process. And that really shifted, I think, a lot of people's ideas of what a cultural consultant can be at that specific place and time. Because what we needed to do was, I mean, in some ways, there were cultures to represent, of course, there always are. But what we needed to look at was like, how will the introduction of the prop, the simulated firearm, occur over time? How are we going to introduce and build cues for resiliency for these actors and these performers? How can the consultant work with not just the performers who will have to experience this night after night, but the stage manager who has to hit the call button that makes the gunshot go off? You know, the student came to me and said, "It feels like I'm doing it to them. Can you help me?" Yes, of course. Yes, this work is working when that's the kind of place that we've established, that we have somebody they know to go to ask these questions. And so we were scaffolding well across time. Okay, great. How is the simulator going to work? Who's going to introduce it to them for the first time? Who's going to be there in that room? How can we make sure that not only are they getting clear, specific direction of what to do with this prop, but also somebody there with them to understand, hey, I see that this is a big thing to put in your hand right now and point at your classmate. That's hard. That's really hard. Hey, we're here too, right? This is also coming from just the mental health training that I do have as sort of part of the work I do. This is not something I suggest just any old consultant does, of course. But I found that Gloria was one of our more successful productions because we had buy-in from every institutional department we had at every step that we needed to have a point person to look at how the introduction of this prop, um, which is the sort of main focus at the end of Act One here. How can that happen across time with intention through the resources we have, through the consultants that we have? So I was very, very proud of that one.
I find that as a transcultural consultant, the department that I'm working most closely with is usually costumes.
Mhm.
Um, and so when I was thinking about this question, I was thinking a lot about props, and that has
Mhm.
been when I've worked most closely, I think, in my consultant role with props folks. And that has been, it's often about things like we label things like bags as men's and women's sometimes, and sometimes that's about something intrinsic about the structure or the like design of the bag that we read as gendered, and sometimes it's about size. And so like thinking about ways to uh navigate conversations with performers about like what type of bag they're going to feel most comfortable with, like what type of hiking backpack is going to work best for your body. And really helping to like destigmatize conversations with trans performers around like what types of objects are going to feel best in a sort of wearable way, and to act as a go-between sometimes in those conversations. But yeah, it's as Raj just kind of alluded at, some of it is like support of the person who's going to need to be asking the question about like, yeah, it's like totally okay to feel weird about this. And these are the questions that need to be asked in order for the object to be correct for the performer. And so let me help you to craft the question in the right way, and like also destigmatize like the sorts of feelings of discomfort that you're having, and also destigmatize the idea um, that or normalize the idea that like we need to be having these conversations even if they're uncomfortable.
Mhm.
Mhm.
When prop managers and prop makers are working with and building props that might intersect with specific cultural identities, religions, or ethnicities, what are some things that we can do to help ensure that we're representing those groups with respect and authenticity?
Yeah, research and listen, I think, are the two things that are true. Like, try to go find the information. If you're not in a position where there is a consultant for who's giving you information or who you can ask, which is a little bit, sorry, jumping ahead in question, but like, try to go out and do some research. And then also, if somebody's like, "Hey, this thing isn't working," then take that at face value, because there's so many different like thinking about trans experience.
Mhm.
Like, there's just most of my most sticky conversations have actually been between different generations of trans people. Um, uh, and so I like, there's just a million ways to have a trans experience. And so it is very likely that even having done a ton of research, a trans actor might come back and say, that thing actually really doesn't work for me, and might have feelings about it because it's like systemic. We've been systemically excluded from the conversations. And so I would say, like, with trying to not self-flagellate, but trying to listen and then move forward from there when given the feedback.
I would say, yeah, and kind of going with this, right? I kind of want to unmarry the idea of like full comprehension of something and authenticity of something also, because some cultures, some practices aren't always meant to be fully understood or cannot be contextualized without interior experience. Um, and so it becomes a question of, well, what are we trying to make sure comes across? What is this core word authenticity is really important to me, because I mean, I don't want to go into like the semiotics and
Mhm.
performance studies of it all, right? But like what does it mean to be authentic? To what place, to what time, to what culture? Because we can't always get like infinitely more specific to the exact cultural consultant that will be the exact person at that exact experience at that exact time. So really, what is driving the desire for authenticity? Is it so audiences see themselves? Is it so that the interior experience of performer renders a better performance? Are we looking for visual cues that are to evoke an experience? So this question of authenticity can even be, I think, interrogated. And then that can lead us towards questions of, okay, so how do we do that? Um, because yeah, I think about this especially for like trans people who have probably a fraught relationship with the idea of visibility and not wanting all of our cultures always fully understood, because that's often been turned around and used against us to harm us. So there's I don't need to explain every instance of what each handkerchief means if you put it in a back pocket of a queer character. Audiences who need to understand, um, and I am curious about, is authenticity always going to get you closer to your goal? I know that's a challenging question. It's probably a subversive little question, but
It is a tough question too,
I,
because, just
uh,
with the understanding that no experience is monolithic either. Um,
I would like to throw into that too, like when does that, hitting the right culture trump access and autonomy for a performer, right?
mhm,
You think about old wheelchairs and how the way that those function completely remove the autonomy of the person using them. They have to be pushed by somebody else.
Yeah.
And is it worth doing that to somebody who needs that autonomy to tell that story, or can you still tell
Does
that
the
story?
critical accuracy matter more than the autonomy of a performer? There's so much tiny detail that goes into that. And we also say that if you have a consensus, you just haven't asked enough people. So at the end of the day, what's important is that the people who are involved day to day feel safe, feel
Yeah.
empowered, and feel that they can answer those questions if someone comes to them, right? If they don't know why they're telling that story that way, and an audience member accosts them after the show, you failed that person. But if they feel empowered to be able to answer the questions or to be able to point to artistic directors or whomever and say, well, I think that's a really great question. You should ask them. Then you've kept the room safe during moments where you're not going to have everyone be 100% happy. There's no way to do that and create art that really matters and makes an impact.
Might distill down the phrase like historical accuracy is not super helpful when historically, accurately speaking, we were oppressed and harmed. And putting our harm on stage becomes more pornographic than the story you attempt to tell in some ways. And
I'm
I'm interested
so
in,
over historical accuracy, historical
I'm so, I
landmark status.
don't
Get it out.
care.
I'm done.
I don't care because you're asking me to reenact violence against my body and the body of my community. And like that comes with it some harm that like I can't not walk away with.
Mhm.
Do any of you have tips for what a prop person should look for early on in the process and how to flag or identify topics that we might want assistance from?
Mm.
Yeah, I mean, again, I don't think that there's a one size fits all answer. So, but I think when I was thinking about this question and being like, what would be helpful here? I'm like, if you and anybody that you directly report to doesn't hold the identities of the things that you're trying to make and doesn't have answers for you, then I think that that's the place. So, and that's different for different props people, right? Depending on the show and depending on the way that the specific production is organized. Like there's different people to look towards. But I do think that there's times, at least in trans work, where like there is no cultural consultant because there's a trans director and a trans playwright, and those people feel really comfortable answering questions. But if and I definitely work with props people on trans specific work who don't hold transness is not a part of their identity. And I'm there answering questions for them. But I think that if you're like, hey, there's some culturally specific objects, and I'm looking around and there's nobody who I can go to who is in a position of power over me, the only people who I could go to are performers and or other people who are maybe either lateral asks or below, then I'd say that's a time to ask for a consultant. And if you have to go above you and that person seems like that question is outside of the scope of their job, then that's another time where I just kind of feel like it's never bad to ask for a consultant. But so I know sometimes we're out of scope of budget.
That's kind of what I was actually going to say too, though, is like the first thing I want people to do is go figure out what the production has actually hired me for, because I hear a lot of, oh, I didn't realize that you would be a good person to talk to about that. Oh, I didn't want to put that on you because I know you're so busy. No, I'm here, right? And I do think that the unfortunate truth is some of that is that these things are kind of hard to talk about. It is sometimes it requires a certain humility to admit that you don't understand something because people sometimes will moralize that. Probably in your real world, you've had experiences of somebody looking and being like, "Ugh, you don't understand that thing." But our job is to know how to welcome you when you have that humility to say, "Hey, I don't understand this thing." And so a good cultural consultant already knows that that conversation might be hard and stumbling for you and is already prepared to help guide you through that. It's a skill that we have to train because, yeah, sometimes you don't understand how our bodies work and like we live in them. So, like, we're so joyous And we probably also have boundaries about how we're going to talk about our individual unique experiences within that. So also learning how to frame these questions. I mean, this is why I really like working with academics. They think about asking the right questions, not how would you do this? How does it feel for you? Hey, as a trans person, when you blank, this is especially true as an intimacy consultant, in which my intimacy in daily life has no effect on what we're doing here today. Um, but yeah, just I would encourage props folks and especially production folks to lean into and accept the awkwardness that they might feel in that conversation and know that they are prepared to be met with people who do this. And we have no. I am more impressed by my colleagues who are willing to admit there's an area for learning than try to convince me that they know everything. Consultants sometimes are, oh, that's great for those people over there who have to learn.
Mhm.
What a wasted opportunity.
I think we've all witnessed it that like some of the best people to work with, and especially people in positions of leadership, the best ones are always the ones who acknowledge the other experts in the room
Mhm.
and that are open to saying, I don't know, let me find out, or letting someone else lead when it's their expertise. So the great thing about bringing consultants in is that you have another set of ears and eyes and support to there's no such thing as a bad question in my mind because you have it. And if you don't ask it, you're going to be wondering and it's going to prevent the work from moving forward. So there's no bad questions, but you do have to have a safe space to ask those questions.
I have one more question, and then I'll open up to the chat and attendees a little bit. And that was, how can we, as theater professionals and as prop professionals, empathetically handle historically offensive topics, such as the word crip in Newsies, but also potentially in historically harmful props on stage, such as Nazi flags and Sound of Music.
So something
And I
I'm
know,
also
Raja, you talked a little bit about the firearm in Gloria, so I think that
Yeah, it's not too
touched on that a little
dissimilar,
bit.
right? So something that we can do is we can make sure that there are clear pathways for so like people know what happens to a prop when it's done, right? Costume shops notably cut up swastikas and burn them. They don't leave them in stock, right? Um, Now there's also questions of sustainability. I don't know. I don't work in a costume shop, so I won't advise there. Um, but giving people clear and specific information at all steps only helps them make informed choices. And even if they don't, I'm thinking about, yeah, like throughout the entire process, we want to know the lifespan of this prop. As actors and performers are often introduced to them through the technical process, and then they just kind of, if the show's closing, they just kind of go off. So clarity around that. Also, where will it be stored? How will it be stored? Who has access to this thing? Under what conditions does this thing come out, right? Um, do we need it for this brush up, or is this like something that we can get a do for it and for? Like, it's the kind of things that we're just trying to figure out, like how much exposure do you need to actually do your job to this exacting prop? Um, this also takes place in language, but there's some parallels there. But yeah, I'm just thinking about like being really clear with them about like, okay, great. So it's going to be introduced on this day, right? We can make sure that we're working with our stage management teams to like let people know, hey, just so you know, on this weekly call, whatever, we know that on Wednesday, the introduction of the prop will be happening, and we'll make sure that X, Y, and Z department are there to help contextualize why is it happening, how does it work, under what circumstances will they have to engage it, and in introducing that slowly, because trauma happens when things are too quick, too fast, and so the more, time is money. But the more we can slow down there and be choice there, the less likely we are to run into these kind of issues that can come up.
And disclosing it as far ahead of time as possible. Having access to a script months before rehearsals start is hugely helpful for everybody involved, but also saying when that is disseminated, here are some, triggering words, triggering props, things that we want to make sure you are aware of, and also know that we are going to talk about this and we are going to make sure you understand the importance of it being there or using this language so you're prepared to have those conversations. I did a production of Hairspray, which uses the R word repeatedly. And the director's immediate response was, we need to cut that word. We have disabled actors on stage. We're just not going to say this word. We'll say something else. And one of the disabled actors said, I think it's really important that you keep that in because I want people to be faced with the reality of how this language is used against people like me. And it became a really beautiful conversation, but like it was difficult, but we were able to have it because we had the script ahead of time and everyone was able to process that it was part of the script and everyone was able to come to a consensus for themselves of whether or not it was important.
Nothing makes a space more accessible than transparency. Like it's about being clear about what folks might experience. And really, at least in the work that we do, it came out of the autism community to use social stories as a way to let folks know what's going to be happening in a show. And that is really a front of house facing tool that is used, but I have incorporated it now into kind of all of the work that I do. Let our artists know what they're going to experience when they come into our spaces and when they work on this specific project. Creating social stories for all aspect of the art that we make lets people kind of opt in or opt out in a way that is going to be successful for them.
It's so much easier to be proactive than reactive. And if you know ahead of time, if you have said, here's what to expect when you arrive at our building, or when you read this script, or when the story we're going to be telling, here's what the set's going to look like, props are going to look like, then people can let you know when they get that information if that's going to cause them harm in some way. And then you've got the time and the bandwidth to be able to react. You were proactive, so you can be reactive. There's no way to properly react if you don't have the space for it or the time for it. So give yourself that space and time.
The one thing that I'd add is just centering story. And so in the case of work that is older that we continually do for various reasons, is the story still something that we want to be telling? And if so, is that language necessary to that story or not? Or is that object necessary to that story or not? And if there is an object or a piece of language that's necessary to that story, how is that object necessary to this story? And how can we all be talking about that object in the context of the full story that we're telling, as opposed to like that object in isolation, which might be much more harmful than the object in context.
Well, name an example of that might be I walked into a theater I was working on, and Scenic didn't think about the fact that they went on break and had left the noose up in the tree.
Yeah.
And it shocked me when I walked in, and I didn't want to go say somebody's in trouble for this. It's just it's as you said, it was the decontextualization of that image. It was the lack of prepare my body felt to engage that material. There were absolutely conditions that I could have met that. It just wasn't that one. So just an example of how that plays out in real time.
So this question is from the chat from Patrick. What language can we use to help an artistic team or management team realize that a consultant is needed and beneficial?
I love to just ask a few questions to start with, oh, have you thought about the accessibility of that set? What if we hire somebody who can't access the lighting grid? Right? Like asking these questions, it plants a seed in their minds of, oh, are we prepared to actually tackle whatever the project is?
Hmm.
And I think, yeah, there's just I mean, if you know you're going to be working on a piece that that is interacting with these communities, obviously then bringing that forward as early in the process as you can. If you are reading a script and you realize that there are props being used in this show that are for accessibility, then can you go to somebody early on and say, hey, how are we going to handle this? What are like, are we hiring a disabled artist who is using these props? When can I meet with that person? Are we going to have a consultant who is going to be able to help navigate those conversations? If it's a disabled character, how are we approaching that work? And if they're not hiring a disabled actor, then you should shame them as well. But that's a different conversation.
Well, and also acknowledging that marginalized communities will be affected regardless if you're telling their story. They will be in your audiences. They are members of your staff, whether you know it or not. And that is important for every institution to recognize that harm might be done even without intention. And having consultants there to help you become aware of those unintended consequences is hugely helpful.
And so I'm just gonna, because this is in the chat right now, and Natalie brought this up, that accessibility being implemented also benefits people who it might not directly be intended for. And I think again, that's the reason for bringing consultants in as well, right? You're going to help folks that aren't even coming forward and asking for this assistance. You're going to create inclusive and accessible spaces for everybody, and that will benefit everybody in that room.
I I've been a little less shameless about admitting, speaking producer language a little bit more. So I got my undergrad 10 years ago and my MFA 5 years ago, and I have watched in real time the ways that the priorities of institutions have switched and changed as culture in America changes. I used to rely on the good faith efforts of people who wanted to do good. And in many places, I will absolutely speak to that and celebrate it. On the other, sometimes I do have to look at a producer and say, listen, it's going to cost you a lot less to pay me to consult you than the lawsuits that are going to come from your inability to meet your legal requirements for accessibility, for access to educational opportunities that are equitable across gender. Um, so we can talk about where your long-term strategy is, but truthfully, I'm going to cost you a lot less than that lawsuit. I don't like that I have to do that, but the reality is I no longer can rely on good faith efforts in the way that I feel like I maybe did when I was bright-eyed coming out of grad school and kind of believing that like everybody wants to do good. And there are people who want to do good. I want to be so clear. And when I find those people, I am so grateful. I'm not afraid to also have multiple narratives going on about why, right? So I have to speak differently to my chair than I do the dean, um, because their institutional priorities are different. I have learned how to speak to that. Um, and sometimes, even if you're the person who's on site, you can say, I think an intimacy professional is going to cost us a lot less, or, so that's some language I think folks can borrow.
I feel like a
So,
really simple and brief question is
yeah.
answer my questions about X, and then they'll either find the person or hire the person.
Yeah, I
So
ask so
we
many questions. Did you mean to, are you playing? Oh, this is what I do all the time. Hey, I'm like really loving what you're doing. Are you purposely calling on this like trope about trans people? Oh, you're not. Oh, okay. Like, and I play into it, right? Because if the answer is yes, then they're willing to talk to you about it. They're doing some consultant work on their end. If they say no, they're going to say, tell me more. Oh, well, that's actually referencing a long trope about trans women's bodies being sexualized in the form of sex workers on police dramas. Uh, you're actually calling a really big history that I think a lot of your audience might know. They're going to want to know more about that. So sometimes I think I'm expanding on what you're getting at, Liam, right? Is like asking a well-meaning question that makes them think about the choices they're making.
Make them think about it and then also let them think it was their idea to bring this consultant in. People love to feel like it's their idea. We know. But if you plant the seed, if you ask the right question, if you reveal it in the right way, it makes people realize their blind spots.
So I feel like we could go on all night and have amazing conversations, but unfortunately, we all also have to work tomorrow. But so I'm going to maybe open it up to folks listening. I also saw Aaron has also posted in the chat. To paraphrase a little bit, going back to that, no experience is a monolith. Where is it more important for us props people to reach out to the actor directly to ask about their needs rather than just going through a consultant?
Honestly, when it comes to like props specifically for an actor, the consultant is going to go through that person too, because each person is entirely unique. Their access needs are unique, their priorities are unique. So more than likely, you're going to be working in tandem altogether. A consultant can help you to have ideas ready so that you're not just assuming someone's access needs, but they can also be there to help facilitate that conversation because there are some uncomfortable questions that might come up about someone's accessibility, someone's disability, and it's helpful to have someone there so it's not just making up, solutions that may or may not even be needed.
Yeah, I mean, I think the more important question to ask is how do you do that when you don't have a consultant? Because I've been on shows before where somebody has come to me and said, "Hey, I need to talk to so and so about X," and I've said, you should actually just go talk to them, right? I don't even need to give you advice. You should just the question you have, you should just go ask them because they're going to give you what you need. So there's definitely those worlds do exist, but I think it's more important to think about how you would approach that if you don't have access to a consultant. And I think that's something we could also talk about for a very long time. And I could not ever give you even, and obviously if, it's like, if you've met one disabled person, you've met one disabled person, like you can't answer for everybody. So that's a little harder, but I think being thoughtful about how you would approach that is the best advice that I can give. Because if you have the consultant, they will steer you the right way. And nobody's ever going to be upset that you went to them first if they then just send you in the right direction.
Mhm.
Just because time is sometimes of the essence when we're trying to figure out who to go ask the question to in the middle of tech. I do think that there's two maybe that to think about in relationship to like if there's a cultural consultant, and one is like, do you have a relationship with the actor? And the other is, do you feel equipped to have the conversation? Because if you have a relationship with the actor and you're equipped to have the conversation, I would say that, yeah, probably you can just go to the actor. I'm also one trans person and one cultural consultant, so I'm sure that other people would have other responses. Um, and yeah, with all advocacy for everything that Paul and Jenna have also been talking about in relationship to when we can slow down, it's good to slow down. But I know sometimes things are moving very quickly, especially in props world.
Yeah. I think might come to a different conclusion, and probably because I'm situated in like intimacy primarily. And it just highlights for me that one of the benefits you do have when you go through the consultant, though, is facilitation of speaking sort of multiple languages and codes that may or may not be understood. So, for example, I know how to speak clinically and specifically where I need to about intimate acts and props. I also know how to have a sort of translated conversation where I need to. And so that's a benefit that sometimes, even though like time is of the essence, sometimes that the time saved and being like, wait, this consultant helped me get to this quicker because they knew the right questions to ask. Just an example I will give, when we are using like sex toy related props. And they are meant to represent something about a given character. I had an actor stop me and be like, "That's cheap. That thing looks cheap. My character cares too much about their sex life to have this cheap toy." Now, I don't know how to go say that to a props person. So then I had to go do some translating. Hey, so on like a dramaturgical level, right? That's my favorite word. Dramaturgically, um, this prop is reading, it's giving the character a sense of inexperience that I don't think we're intending to. Um, that's way easier than an actor trying to fumble and like maybe accidentally disclose their own understanding about the culture or their own sort of practices. So that's one of the benefits, although sometimes it is easier to take the quickest path. Just depends.
Thanks so much to all of you. You've all been amazing, and hopefully we will hear more about you in the future as you go on. I'm going to turn this back over to Tammy.
Yes, thank you all for joining us tonight. There's nothing better than building collective knowledge. We have more Spaminars in the works, so keep an eye out for announcements and definitely keep those topic suggestions coming. We want to hear what you want to learn about. If you're a working prop manager in a nonprofit theater, opera, children's theater, or educator teaching props, we'd love to have you join SPM. Just head to our website or click the link in the chat to sign up. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. Those links are in the chat as well, or I will put them in the chat. A big shout out to the SPM and our amazing members who make these sessions happen. Patrick Joan, Freed, Ben Homan, Nikki Kulas, Jen McClure, Amy Peter, Sarah Pugh, and Karen Robbie. Thank you again for joining us. Prop on, and we'll see you next time.